So in this video, we're going to be looking at what happens when we try to optimize area and perimeter. So what that means is trying to get the biggest area that we can for the least amount of perimeter. And this is a really helpful concept for things like building, where we want to try to keep our costs down, but we want to try to have a fairly large size, something like a larger house or a deck in this case, but we want to try to minimize our costs. So in this particular problem, you're being asked to be building a deck, and you have 20 meters of railing. So that railing would be the perimeter, and we want to try to get the largest possible deck that we can to be able to have the most space to entertain. And our railing is going to go around all four sides of the deck. So first thing that you want to think about is what are some of the possible rectangles that you can make. So you can have a deck like this that is 1 meter and 1 meter and 9 and 9. So in total, that will give me a perimeter of 20. So what you want to aim for is your length plus your width needs to be half of the perimeter. So in this case, your length and your width will always be 10. And in this particular rectangle, the area, base times height, or 1 times 9, is 9. So what's another one? Well, we could have 2 and 8, and that area would be 16. We could have 3 and 7, and that area would be 21. We could have 4 and 6, and that area would be 24. And then the last one we can make, and a lot of people get messed up with this one, we can have 5 and 5, and that area would be 25. Now, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, that's a square, and you said the deck has to be a rectangle. Well, a square is just a special kind of rectangle that happens to have equal sides. So a square fits into the definition of a rectangle. So a square is considered a rectangle, just a special kind of rectangle. So when we look at these 5 possible decks, and this is all that we can make with a perimeter of 20 if we keep our side lengths whole numbers, which one has the biggest area? So the one that has the biggest area is right here. And what is special about this particular rectangle? Well, this particular rectangle is special because it's a square. So what we actually can conclude from this, if we kept looking at different types of, that gave you other perimeters, what we're going to find is that a square is always going to give you the most area possible for the least perimeter possible. So it says what type of rectangle will always provide the maximum area for any perimeter? The answer to that is a square. Always. A square is always going to give you the biggest area for a given perimeter if you have to build something rectangular. So now the question is there a formula that would help us to go from the perimeter to the side length to the area? So in this case, the perimeter was 20, and we found out that the side length was 5, and the area was 25. How can we go from 20 as a perimeter to 25 as an area? Well, the first thing you have to realize is if it's a square, all 4 sides are going to be the same. So regardless of what the perimeter is, each of these sides is going to be the same. So the perimeter of a square is just 4 times whatever the side is. So if the perimeter in this case was 20, how do I get what the side is? Well, I just need to divide by 4. So the perimeter divided by 4 will always give me the side length. And it will give me the side length that is going to give me the biggest area possible. Then I have to ask myself, well, how do I get area from that? So if I know that my side length is 5, how do I get an area of 25? Well, because it's a square, how do I get the area? I just do 5 times 5. Or another way of saying that is 5 squared. So for my formula then, to get area, I just take my perimeter and divide it by 4. That will give me what one side is. And then I take that answer and I square it to get the area. So this formula is an important one to use. So for example, in this case, the perimeter was 20. What if the perimeter was 40? What would the area be? Well, I would just use my formula. Each side of my square will be 10, And when I square it, I get 100. What if the perimeter was 70? Well, each side, oh, this one's harder because I can't do it. Let's make it 80. Then I can do it in my head easily. So if the perimeter was 80, each side would be 20. When I square that, I get 400. So any perimeter that you're given, you could figure out the length of the side and figure out the area, remembering that the shape that's the best is a square. So let's look at a different problem. Let's look at what happened. So this one says you're in charge of creating a safe swimming area for guests at a Caribbean resort. In the beach equipment shed, you find a buoy rope that is 100 meters long. You do not have to run the buoys along the edge of the beach, so you only will need 3 sides of your rectangle. So if we can picture this, so right here, this area here is the beach. So we need to take our rope and make us area in the water for people to be swimming. It will only need 3 sides because the beach acts as its own barriers. We don't need to put rope along the beach. So this is saying, well, now we're limited to 100 for our perimeter. What are some of the possible swimming areas that we could make? So again, I could, if I wanted to, be like really tiny here and be like 1 and 49, and I could list out a whole bunch, and I could do 2 and 48 and so on. One thing that a lot of people think about is like, oh, maybe it's going to be a square. So let's take 100 and let's divide it by 3, and each side's going to be 33.3. When I do that, I'm going to get an area. This one I will use my calculator for. I'm going to get an area, 33.3 times 33.3. That's about 1,110.9. Now the question is there a shape that would be better, that would give me more area? If I keep trying things, you might come across thinking like, well, what about 20 and 20 and 60? Well, that area, so that gives me a perimeter of 100. That area is going to give me 1,200. Well, hey, that's going to be better than that number. Or what about 30 and 30 and 40? Well, that area is also going to be 1,200. So is there another number that would be better? And if I keep looking at that, I'm going to actually come across 25, 25, and 50. And that area is going to be 1,250. And this one is going to be the best one. Now, the interesting thing with this one is if the beach did not exist, so there's my beach right there. If the beach did not exist, I've created, this is a square that would be 50 by 50. What do I notice about this particular number, 25? It's half of what that number is, and that's really important. So when there's only 3 sides, you want to try to create a shape where the length is double the width. So if this is the width, this side has to be double that. And that shape will always give you the biggest area when there's only 3 sides. So let's look here. So it says, what is the shape? So in this case, it's a rectangle, but it's a special rectangle where the length is double the width. So it's not a square, it's a rectangle where the length is double what the width is. So would this be the same as if you had all 4 sides? The answer is no. If you had 100 meters and you had all 4 sides, remember that would be perimeter divided by 4 squared, or 25 squared, and you would get 625. That's going to be different. However, that number 25 is still used, right? In this particular one, 25 is still there. So we still do perimeter divided by 4, and this has to be double that. So what's a formula we could come up with? Well, I just said, how did I get 25? I did perimeter divided by 4, right? 100 divided by 4 gave me 25. How did I get 50? That's the perimeter divided by 2. When I simplify that, I end up with p squared divided by 8. So that formula is always going to give me the biggest area possible if I only need to have 3 sides. So other examples of 3 sides is like making a garden, but the garden is against your house, or the garden is against your garage. So things where, or if you have a fence, but you only need to fence 3 sides because your house is one of the sides. Or if you're trying to have, like, maybe you're creating a play area and one side is like a river or something, so you don't need to put something on that side. Let's look at one final piece. So this one is a little bit of an opposite. So this one, I give you an area, and I want you to see if you can tell me what the perimeter might be. Again, we want to try to make the biggest garden possible. So our area is 100. So I could make it a garden that was 1 times 100, or that was 2 times 50. So in this case, be careful, our area is 100. So all of these need to give me an area of 100. The perimeters are going to be different. So in this case, the perimeter will be 202. In this case, the perimeter will be 104. I could do one that was like 5 and 20, and that's still an area of 100. In that case, the perimeter is 50. So my perimeter is significantly going down as I change the shape. So remember, what kind of shape is going to give me the biggest area for the least perimeter? That's a square. So if my area has to be 100, what does each side of the square need to be? So what number will give me, what number times itself gives me 100? Well, remember, that's 10. Oh, my pen has stopped working, so now I have to use my finger. That's 10 squared. So this side will be 10, and this side will be 10. Okay, so what would the perimeter be in that case? Well, that would just be 10 times 4, or 40. Okay, so now it says, what's a formula that if you were given an area, you could come up with a perimeter? Well, how did I get from 100 to 10? Some of you might think, oh, I divided by 10, but that's not going to work for other areas. So for example, what if the area was 25? What would your side lengths be? And dividing by 10 isn't going to help you. Your side lengths would be 5. So how did I get from 25 to 5? How did I get from 100 to 10? What you're actually going to have to do here is you have to square root the area. Square root 100 or square root 25. So my formula, if I square root my area, I'm going to get what the side length is. How do I get perimeter? So if we come back to here, once I knew that my side length was 10, how did I get perimeter? I times it by 4, because why? I multiply by 4 because there are 4 sides to my shape. So I'm going to take that and times it by 4. That formula will work for any area I give you. So for example, let's say the area was 64. What would the perimeter be? Let's square root that and times it by 4. Square root of 64 is 8, and my perimeter would be 32.